And we are joined right now by Padres assistant GM Josh Stein here on a Friar Friday. Josh, good morning.
Good morning, guys. How's it going?
Going well, man. I wonder if you were listening a few weeks back when I was on vacation in Kauai. It was the day after the deadline, and everyone in town was really excited. I know you were excited, and AJ was excited, but there was one guy stood alone about his lack of excitement for the moves, and it was Ben Higgins. Did you hear that morning show and your boss absolutely roast him?
I heard the tail end of it. I didn't hear Ben's take at the beginning, but I did hear kind of AJ's response to it.
It was
Excuse me for being at least measured in my approach. Now, it's
That's
gone
fair.
pretty well the
That's
last
fair.
month, Josh. I must say that the moves have worked out. What's your take on how well the moves have worked out so far for your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we went into that kind of period of time in the season with some real what we felt were needs to address on the roster, and we're able to address those really kind of in a what we felt was a pretty creative fashion, and then to be able to go out and add a pitcher like Mason Miller to what was already a great strength of the team. That was kind of the capper. I know kind of the sequence of events and the kind of the order of it might not have made all the sense in the world as it was happening, but kind of what our vision was and what we were kind of trying to line up throughout the course of that week, and that morning in particular, we had a pretty good idea of being able to address all the needs of the club.
No, it was certainly a frenetic day, as it oftentimes is at the trade deadline for the San Diego Padres, Josh. And, I wanted to ask you this, and this isn't to denigrate anybody that's been here before. This is just, it seems like the guys that you added fit in immediately, right? It didn't feel square peg round hole. It was like, let's acquire this guy because, well, I mean, we can. Like these were needs. You guys addressed them, but I think the character and the makeup of these guys maybe is different than anybody we've seen, and they just seem to fit so seamlessly in this lineup and with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I agree with you, and I think that's it's certainly intentional and on a couple of fronts. I think obviously in the scouting of these players and trying to identify not just their physical abilities, but who they are as players, maybe their journeys to get to the spots they've gotten to, whether it's, like an all-star season from a Ryan O'Hearn or, like a Freddie Fermin, who's been, backing up a Hall of Fame catcher. But, I think we were, very intentional in terms of, looking for players that, we felt would, fit with the team that we had based on, certainly skill set. That's always going to be, the driving factor, but also the roles and competitive situations that they may have been in the past and would be coming into. And then I know Mike's talked about it, and Schulte, and I think this is a very important element as well. Blending the new players with players on our team that may be facing somewhat diminished roles, and working through that as a coaching staff and as an organization. I mean, there's an art to that, and I think that that's something that that we've done very well here, especially this year. And I think that that's when you look at the byproduct and you see kind of the guys saying the right things and it's seeming to fit together well. I think it's a function of those two things, like identifying those people at the front end, and then having a situation, a team, an environment that's prepared when they do show up and walk through those doors.
I've noticed that sometimes, Josh, the move that flies under the radar turns out to be more impactful than we as fans imagine. We talked so much about Mason Miller and, of course, Ramon Laureano and Freddie Fermin and Ryan O'Hearn that the Nestor Cortes trade seemed like kind of a bit of an afterthought. So Brandon Lockridge, who, of course, we enjoyed here, but wasn't playing a critical role with the team. And then Nestor Cortes is coming off a great start against the Dodgers, gets another big one tonight. But you also got a prospect in that deal. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about that one because we're hearing good things about Jorge Quintana and what he's done since just the brief time he's been in the Padres system. Tell me more about that trade and who you picked up in that deal as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the more, I would say, unique ones, just because Nestor was on an extended rehab assignment and had been on the 60-day IL, really, spent the bulk of the year, on the IL, coming back from a forearm injury. And I think, again, you always learn in these jobs and in these roles. And, I think that, there's the adage, you can never have, too much pitching. And I go back to, a few years ago, us deciding to kind of roll with what we felt was a lot of very good, young, starting pitching, and felt like we had enough to withstand. And almost immediately, after the deadline, we had a couple of our starters go down with injuries, and you're sitting there saying, wow, we've got to go to the waiver wire. We've got to look to, to recently released players. And so, part of it is, part of that trade, and part of really going out and, we knew we were going to be trading some of our starting pitching depth in some of these trades, and knowing that not only did we need to replenish to get back to 5 starting pitchers, but like, you really need to think beyond that, right? You need to say, hey, what if, this doesn't happen, or this pitcher, isn't able to come back from injury. So, I think getting Nestor, and getting that depth, certainly a veteran pitcher that's pitched in a lot of big games, big situations, someone that when he's healthy and takes the ball, we have a ton of confidence in. And then, to your question about Jorge Quintana, I mean, that's, there was a couple teams that were really interested in Brandon Lockridge, and, so we were able to, leverage that and talk about, getting something back in addition to Nestor Cortez in that deal. And, we had a lot of back and forth with the Brewers, in those morning hours, and probably exchanged, I don't know, half a dozen names, and ultimately got to a player in Jorge Quintana that, we had scouted down in Arizona, Matt Thomas, our scout down there. It gets back to really being where the players are that you can acquire, right? And scouting the players that you can acquire. And so, even though Jorge Quintana doesn't have a long track record in professional baseball, he's someone that we've seen and we're interested in, and, plays is really a plus defender up the middle, switch hitter. We're intrigued by some things that he can do offensively, but also just great makeup, great personality that we've seen, both before and after acquiring him. And when you can add a player like that at the same time as acquiring starting pitching depth, it's a real win for the organization.
Talking to Padres assistant GM Josh Stein here on Ben and Woods this morning. And Josh, you look at the rankings that come out after you guys trade a bunch, and maybe 7 years ago when we first started doing this together as a show, I think the panic would have set in. And based on your track record, AJ's track record, the last couple of years, I mean, this is like the 4th year in a row everyone has said they don't have the prospects to trade, so they're not going to be able to do much at the deadline. And lo and behold, you added everything you really needed to make a push. So now it sits at number 30 out of 30. I know how you guys view it as a challenge. So I'm sure it's already started, but like, walk us through what you want to do to get that number back up to, something that you guys are happy and comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, and that's a good word for it. I don't think it's unique to the Padres, and I certainly don't think it's not one that we haven't faced before. I mean, I'll say this. I mean, in the probably, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours after the deadline, we're all kind of sitting there dazed. The adrenaline's kind of worn off, and Chris Kemp, who, again, I mean, you talk about what you have to give up in these trades, right? We're trading, whether it's Leo DeVries or whether it's Boston Bateman, and a number of players that we drafted, and we get invested in these players, right? We scout them, we get to know them, we get to know their families. So, Chris is very invested in these players, but Chris Kemp gets up in the front of the room and starts just writing and ranking our top 30 prospects, and we're kind of sitting there all watching, maybe a few people weighing in, and looking at the state of our current farm system. And I think the general feeling is there's still a lot there.
Yep.
I mean, we don't feel like we have a barren farm system at all. Ultimately, the public rankings are what they are. What we've often maintained, and what you probably heard AJ talk about, is if teams are calling us and engaging with us in trade discussions, they tend to be interested in the players that we have in our farm system, and so I think that speaks really to the continued strength. I'm not going to say we're a top 10 farm system in the game right now, but I also, I don't frankly agree with, the current rankings that are out there. But getting back to your question, I mean, yeah, it's an everyday challenge in baseball operation. It's one that, I think we all embrace. It's one that, whether it's Chris Kemp overseeing our amateur and international scouting group, and them, texting almost immediately, getting on the horn, being like, all right, time to reload. Let's get after it. And, getting out to the next amateur showcase, or, it's Pete DeYoung and, right now overseeing our pro scouting group, and, really focused on, okay, who are the looks that we need to get, over the next, month and a half while the minor league season's going on, because, we're going to be shortly getting into Rule 5 draft discussions. We're going to be talking about minor league free agents, and certainly augmented by, very strong research and development department and analysts that are always flagging and identifying, interesting candidates to go for our scouts to go out and, see. So it really is like it is a challenge. It's a everyday process. It doesn't change just because we've traded a number of prospects. And I think that, that a lot of that stems back to, just AJ's philosophy of, of a scouting and player development driven organization, and identifying players every year. We talk about it a lot. We cannot miss in the draft. We can't miss. Every organization could say that, but I think it's a mantra that we really try and live by, and treat that as one of the most important days of every year.
It's true. We were laughing about it earlier, going through the box scores yesterday, and just seeing how many former Padres and Padres pitchers appeared in games yesterday. Oh, there's Adam Major. There's Steven Wilson.
Yeah, we talk about it.
Just all over the place. But, speaking of pitching for next season, just quickly, I wanted to ask you this. With Bergert and Kolek and Braden Nett all traded, King and Cease free agents to be, who do you have in the organization that you identify either in the minor leagues or in the bullpen that could be potential starters for you guys next year?
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think like we do expect to get a pretty good one back in Joe Musgrove, so that's going to be a big big one that we anticipate slotting back in, and yeah, we did trade some of our upper level pitching depth. Obviously we did also backfill it, and whether it's a JP Sears, who we're going to have, here in this organization, for a number of years moving forward. These guys aren't really, I wouldn't consider them minor leaguers, but, Randy Vasquez, JP Sears, obviously Matt Waldron, what he did last year, and still having a lot of faith, especially in Matt, with the knuckleball, more probably, at the major league level than in some of the AAA ballparks that he's had to pitch in. But, going a level below, some of those names that I know, fans are very familiar with. I mean, one player we're very high on, that got asked about a number of trades that we did not move is a starter at AA, Miguel Mendez, 23 years old, another, kind of under the radar international scouting find, and, in the upper 90s, and, as a wipeout slider, a good developing changeup, someone that we think very highly of. There's other starters there as well, Jagger Haynes, Eric Yost, guys that, we've promoted, this year up to that AA level. So, again, that is the challenge, and it'll always be the challenge, is to replenish that starting pitching depth. I think, to your point, Ben, in terms of like relievers, I think that's something, we've always had an eye on, right? Whether it was transitioning Stephen Kolek this year, Michael King last year, Seth Lugo. I think that's something that we do have an eye on as an organization, and, feel like, with Ruben, Ben Fritz, our entire kind of pitching group, excuse me, it's an area that, that we can continue to look at guys. I have a few ideas.
Yeah,
probably not going to tip my hand in terms of who those are right now.
Josh.
But
that's fine. That's fine.
That's for us to speculate.
We appreciate
Steiner.
it, Josh.
Thank
it's
you,
always
buddy.
great to have you on a Friar Friday. Thank you so much.